War. War never changes, but Fallout surely does. Going from an asymmetrical tactical game, to a first-person shooter, to an online survival title. Many like myself started the franchise with Fallout 3, or another Bethesda-made title, yet few have actually played the OG Fallout, a game that tells a different tale with a different storyteller. But first things first, roll the intro. Fallout became a mainstream series in 2008 when the name was revived and freshened up by Bethesda Game Studios that transformed the series to what we know it today. The original game, developed by Interplay, now Obsidian, back in the 90s, fell into the obscurity due to its antiquated mechanics and fundamental different structure. Many modern Fallout fans respect the old titles but keep a distance from it due to the drastic difference it has in comparison to newer games. I felt that way too, loving the lore of the franchise but finding myself uneasy about the idea of picking it up. But I did eventually find the strength to dive in the past and play the now 25 years old title that is Fallout 1. Before starting off the review itself, I will make clear how I organize this video. In the first half, I will share my experience with Fallout 1 and evaluate it as separate to the rest of the franchise. In the second half, I will directly confront them to modern titles, especially the latest mainline one, Fallout 4. Without further ado, let's get started. The adventure starts in the far lands of Southern California, more specifically in Vault 13, where a malfunction in the water facility drives the oasis to chaos. Without a working water chip, all Vault dwellers are doomed, so it is your duty to retrieve one for God knows where in the uncharted lands of post-war America. If you're a Fallout fan, you already know the premise of the saga. After a global nuclear war, the United States became a barren wasteland, an untamed land filled with riders, mutants, and irradiated creatures, but also settlements, factions, and some springing civilizations. Fallout 1 is the first post-apocalyptic role-playing game, so many tropes from the setting come from here. The adventure is rich in locations to discover and plots to uncover. Relative to other Fallout games, the experience is fairly short, no more than 20 hours, yet dense with side quests, characters, and options to diversify your experience. I don't know if we should dive into details to avoid spoilers, but let's just say that Fallout 1 gave a solid base to the whole franchise. I greatly appreciated the simplicity of the premise. The player's task is straightforward, is to find a water ship to save his or her vault. Needless to say that this is no easy odyssey to embark on, and many revelations along the way will detail the journey. Yet, rather than to have a somewhat convoluted reason that loses all meaning along the way, the consistency of the premise drives the plot forward and keeps the rhythm constant. Unfortunately, since Fallout 1 is an oldie, quest marking and minimaps are rudimental and it may become challenging to follow the game properly. You may wander off too much and find yourself near the end of the game but just going to the wrong town. Furthermore, there are some fundamental bugs like the management of companions that makes the experience quite daunting. Now, if you are planning to play Fallout 1, I strongly suggest you to use the mod Fallout Fix and to have a small guide next to you. The mod makes some quality of life improvements and the guide may help you to double check if there are side quests available. Not all NPCs around town have unique textures, so you might not find certain characters with ease. As you may observe from the footage, the game is structurally different from modern Fallout titles. It is an asymmetric turn-based with a focus on strategy rather than gunslinger skills. The challenge of the game is found more in the management of the resources and the approach taken for combat rather than the fights themselves. Nothing is taken for granted in this barren wasteland, and it is your duty to keep track on time since water in the vault will not last forever. Now, do not worry, you don't need to Majora Mask your way out of California, but the world will not wait for you, and you have to keep this in mind for every action you take. The freedom the game has is the element that impresses me the most about Fallout 1. I was not expecting to have so many degrees of freedom when exploring the wasteland. I will not be uncommon for two players who have carried out journeys in different manners, giving me that breath of the wild sensation of pure liberty when doing my first run. There are many specific examples that would highlight the genuinity of the game's structure, but as explained earlier, since the adventure is fairly short, I do not wish to spoil any quests or areas. What I do wish to do subsequently, however, is to compare Fallout 1 to modern Fallout games, and more specifically to Fallout 4. Even if that can separate the first title to modern games, how does it still hold up? Let me explain. It would be obsolete to discuss the difference in gameplay since they are self-evident, yet what is less obvious are the difference in gameplay structure and philosophy between Fallout 1 and the modern titles. In other words, the biggest difference to note are the ones in concepts and visions had by Interplay and Bethesda. It is known that both games take place in North America after a nuclear war, Fallout 1 about 100 years after the war, and Fallout 3, 4 and New Vegas about 200 years post-war. However, the interpretation of such worlds vary greatly. In the newer Fallouts, the apocalypse seems to have happened the day before the player steps outside the vault, and in Fallout 1 there is a greater emphasis on how cities and settlements have repopulated and started new lives. The post in post-nuclear role-playing game is made much more explicit in original Fallouts than in the later ones. Speaking of role-playing, while the graphics are limited to say the least, the original game has a depth role-playing component, allowing the player to do virtually everything he or she desires. Fallout 3 and New Vegas are a bit more limited, but still very permissive. Fallout 4, on the other hand, let us not talk about it. To give some praise to the newer Fallouts, the first title main quest and storyline was charming but quite short. Again, it took me no more than 20 hours to complete the game doing nearly every sub-quest, while doing the same in the newer titles would take me triple the time. The length of a game is not a positive nor a negative aspect alone, but of course if an RPG is well done, the more of it, the better. This statement is true for Fallout 3 and New Vegas. For 4, less so. I believe Fallout 2 is bigger and more expansive than Fallout 1, but I still need to play that title as well. As a last note, I do realize that the later titles are much more permissive and inclusive than the first one. If you're planning to play Fallout 1, something that of course I highly suggest, do so by immersing yourself in the game and not as a way to complete a checklist. Fallout 1 is unique, an outstanding gem of an era long gone. You will enjoy it, but you have to have patience with it. Fallout 1 was released in 1997, 25 years from the publication of this video in 2022, and I have to say that while the game is a bit rusted and adapting to the old mechanic takes time and patience, Fallout 1 is an incredible experience both as a standalone game and especially as part of the Fallout franchise. I would heavily suggest to modern Fallout fans to give this game a try, and eventually I think I'll also play the sequel. I think I made clear in multiple videos that I do not like Fallout 4, not because it's poorly made, but because I miss the role-playing elements New Vegas and Fallout 3 had, and now that I played the original game, the hollowness of the role-playing mechanics in the latest single-player Fallout is much more pronounced, let alone in Fallout 76. I would not mind seeing a full remake of the original Fallout, but the experience I felt when discovering this old gem has to be kept intact. Simply remaking Fallout 1 in Starfield engine will not cut it. This point is easier to understand when playing the game rather than describing it in words, so I think it is wise for me to conclude this review praising and suggesting you to give Fallout 1 an opportunity. It may amaze you as it did amaze me. If you made it this far, I want to thank you one too many Fallout times for watching today's video. Today's review was more straightforward and less convoluted than usual, but I hope you still like it. Do not forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more, it really helps out the channel to grow. Having said that, I wish you a wonderful day. Arrivederci.